It began on a quiet afternoon at the ranch. The wind carried the smell of fresh hay, and the cattle grazed peacefully by the fence line. But the peace broke when 3 black SUVs rolled up the long dirt driveway. Men in uniforms jumped out, wearing badges that glittered under the sun. They called themselves HOA enforcement. The rancher, Daniel, froze in disbelief. He didn't even live in an HOA, this was his grandfather's land, passed down for generations. Yet these so-called officers acted like they had authority, demanding to inspect his barn and livestock. Something felt off. Their uniforms didn't match any real department he knew. But Daniel stayed calm, his heart racing as he realized something was wrong. He decided not to confront them yet. Instead, he picked up his phone and quietly texted his cousin, who just happened to be the county sheriff. The stage was set for a showdown bigger than any ranch drama he'd ever lived through. The men in fake uniforms swaggered around the ranch like they owned it. One of them shoved papers into Daniel's hands, claiming the ranch owed HOA violation fees for improper fencing, unapproved structures, and even unauthorized animals. Daniel almost laughed, these were cattle, not pets in a neighborhood. But the men weren't joking. They threatened heavy fines and even talked about seizing parts of his land. Daniel could feel his blood boiling, but he knew better than to let anger take over. He played along, asking questions, all while buying time. His cousin hadn't arrived yet, but he knew it wouldn't take long. The imposters grew bolder, demanding Daniel unlock the barn so they could inspect for compliance. Their arrogance was so complete, they didn't notice the real storm brewing on the horizon, the sheriff's truck speeding down the country road, lights flashing red and blue. The sound of tires crunching on gravel cut through the tense silence. Daniel's cousin, Sheriff Mark, stepped out of his patrol truck, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. His presence alone shifted the air. The fake officers froze. Mark's voice was calm but firm as he asked, "Which department did you say you're from?" The imposters hesitated, fumbling with their fake IDs. Mark didn't even need to look closely, he knew a fraud when he saw one. Daniel stood quietly by his side, watching relief and justice collide in the same moment. The imposters tried to argue, claiming they were on official HOA duty. Mark's face hardened. "HOA doesn't run this county." "I do," he said with steady authority. One of the men tried to bluff, but their confidence was slipping fast. The truth was coming down on them, and they could feel it. Sheriff Mark began asking questions rapidly, leaving the fake officers stumbling over their lies. Where was their jurisdiction? Which court approved their enforcement? Why were their badges unregistered? Their answers didn't line up. Daniel couldn't help but notice how their uniforms looked like cheap imitations, badges glued on, belts mismatched, no official markings. The ranch hands gathered nearby, watching the drama unfold, whispering about how bold someone had to be to pretend to be law enforcement in broad daylight. Mark radioed in, requesting backup just in case. The imposters started sweating under the pressure. They claimed they were authorized by the HOA board to collect and enforce rules. But when Mark pressed for legal documents, all they produced were poorly copied papers stamped with fake seals. The sheriff shook his head, his patience thinning. Daniel's anger turned into something else, amusement. These frauds had walked into the wrong county, and now the walls were closing in. Backup arrived quickly, 2 more patrol cars pulling into the ranch. The imposters' confidence collapsed entirely as real deputies stepped out, ready for action. Sheriff Mark gave them one last chance: leave peacefully, or explain yourselves downtown. But pride got the better of them. The fake officers shouted about rights and powers they never had, waving their phony paperwork around like it meant something. Daniel stood behind his cousin, finally speaking up. "You picked the wrong ranch. This land doesn't bow to any HOA, real or fake." The crowd of ranch hands cheered lightly, their loyalty clear. The imposters glanced around, realizing they were outnumbered, outmatched, and out of time. The sheriff calmly ordered his deputies forward. The so-called HOA cops were done pretending they knew it, and everyone else did too. As deputies checked the imposters' IDs, the truth unraveled. These men weren't law officers at all. They were hired muscle for a shady HOA board in the neighboring county, sent to scare Daniel into giving up land near the river, a piece of property the board wanted for development. They thought dressing up as cops would intimidate him into surrendering. But they hadn't counted on family ties or the law being on Daniel's side. Sheriff Mark shook his head in disbelief at their audacity. You tried to impersonate officers, trespass on private land, and extort a rancher, he said firmly. Daniel felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. His grandfather's land was safe, for now. But more importantly, the imposters were facing consequences they never expected. The deputies began escorting them toward the patrol cars, their fake authority stripped away in an instant. The ranch grew quiet again, the imposters gone, their SUVs left behind as evidence. Sheriff Mark patted Daniel on the back. You don't have to worry. This land is yours, and no one's taking it with lies. Daniel looked out across the wide fields, the cattle grazing peacefully once more. The ranch had stood for generations, and it would continue to stand long after this failed stunt. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The fake HOA cops tried to raid the ranch, only to be brought down by the actual sheriff, Daniel's own cousin. The ranch hands laughed about it for weeks, calling it the day the HOA learned the county's real law. Daniel simply smiled, knowing justice had been served in the most fitting way possible, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.